very good afternoon. Hi students, welcome to the platform of eGurukul. Myself Dr. Ramyasri, I teach obstetrics and gynecology. So today we are going to do the INI CET recall questions pertaining to the subject of OBG. If I have to assess this question paper, I would say the question paper was, there were 2-3 questions which were completely googly, matlab 100% we don't read under the undergraduate, right? But that apart from the Robsons, I think others were somewhere discussed. Others were discussed in our classrooms, right? In our notes, right? Two of them questions were like what you see in your practical, what you see in your OPDs and labor rooms, because they always try to assess how much you work in your hospital, right? So on the whole, if you think of Robsons and then make your mindset for the other questions, it's a big problem. But if you keep Robsons aside and if you can grab the marks of all other questions, then you have done awesome, right? So OBG is always a highly scoring subject. So 1 or 2 googlies, don't bother. But if you are having a 15 question or 20 question, try to score max out of max in the OBG, right? And as you have time till March, you can revise and make it as the strongest subject. And with my simple concepts, I think it is very easy to retain the subject and reproduce it back. Keep practicing more and more MCQs, and at any point of time, if you want any queries, I'm always there to help you all, right? So with this, let's start with the session. First question. So I first kept both 2 questions from CA cervix. So to tell you how important is CA cervix. CA cervix, always you tend to get a question. So here today we got 2 questions from cancer cervix. A female attends the gynecological OPD with history of frequent trichomonas vaginalis infection. So she is a known case and she is having repeated trichomonas infection. She was advised for pap smear. Patient inquires the role of pap smear in her. Now, when the patient is having a history of frequent trichomonas, I am not doing a pap smear on her to confirm again, oh, she has a pap smear infection. She is also aware, I am also aware, both of us are aware that she is having trichomonas and we can treat the trichomonas with metronidazole, right? Now, but I would definitely like to check the pap smear on her because she's having repeated infection. So what is the purpose of me checking on her for the pap smear? Is to check for whether she has any cervical changes, right? So helps to screen. So what is the role of pap smear? Helps to screen for cancer cervix, helps to diagnose cancer in the genital tract. Some students told me that they were telling it is helping to screen cancers of genital tract. If the option would have been helps to screen cancers in the genital tract, probably I have gone with it. But the option which I got from majority students is help to diagnose cancer in the genital tract. Pap smear is a screening test. It can never diagnose a disease. Even if you see some abnormality on a pap smear, you always have to go back and confirm it with biopsy, right? So as it is given diagnose, I am not agreeing with this. Helps to demonstrate trichomonas vaginalis infection. Actually, this option is correct. It helps you to helps to demonstrate the trichomonas infection. It helps to diagnose other genital infections in the patient. Now, to get a clarity of these options, let's see about pap smear, how the interpretation of pap smear will be and what all we can acquire the information from a pap smear image, and then come back to this question again to tell what should be your answer. So pap smear, not only pap smear, we can also use liquid based cytology for interpreting the vaginal as well as cervical cytology. So your pap smear or LBC helps you to tell you about the vaginal cytology as well as cervical cytology. Okay. So the Bethesda system, or we use mainly the Bethesda system of interpretation, which mainly categorizes your result or report into these. First, it gives you specimen type, whether it is LBC report, liquid based cytology based specimen, or whether it is pap smear specimen. Pap smear, the problem is once you take the iris spatula and cytobrush, take the sample, put it on the smear, and then you have to put it in then you send it to the lab where it is air dried, stained. In this process, we lose 80% of the cells. Okay. So the sensitivity and specificity is little less. Now coming to the liquid based cytology, you use the rover cytobrush, dip it in the specimen, send to the lab, centrifuge it. You get a more number of cells. You get more mono layer of cells with more number of cervical cells per examination. So sample adequacy and sensitivity and specificity is more for LBC. So mentioning the specimen type helps me to understand how much is the sensitivity and specificity of this test. Then they give the specimen adequacy. As I told you, pap smear you always have a problem with the specimen adequacy. So, but LBC you don't have that problem. So whether the sample is adequate or not adequate, they'll mention. Then there is an optional thing that they can categorize it. The general categorization and interpretation is given, or the interpretation is given. We will go through how do they interpret. Automated review. So whether it is a automated review, if it is a automated lab based review, they'll give you that, or if it is checked by a pathologist also will be mentioned. Finally, the ancillary testing, where they'll mention you the summary of the everything together, and so that it will be easy for the clinician to understand. Okay, so this is the points which are considered under the Bethesda system of interpretation. So general categorization is optional. They can do this or they don't require to do this, but interpretational result is important. So in the interpretational result, they'll mention first negative for intraepithelial lesion or malignancy. It means there is no problem. Second, they'll also mention if there is an inflammation or infection. If there is an infection, they'll mention what is the organism which they are seeing. So infection with the organisms are being mentioned. They'll also mention if there are any epithelial cell abnormalities, whether they are squamous cell abnormalities or whether they are glandular cell, columnar cells, glandular cells abnormality, or whether there are endometrial cells also can be mentioned. Okay, so that tells us you not only diagnose cervical cancer, you can not only screen, you can also to some extent understand about this vaginal cytology, to some extent understand about the endometrial cytology also through pap smear. Let's see further also, don't worry. And others, that is presence of endometrial cells. So if they tell there is an infection, they always have to specify the organism. Previously in some of the papers we actually got a question being asked, which organism, which infection cannot be picked up by a pap smear, and there were options of trichomonas, bacterial vaginosis, inflammation and gonococci. So that question so you can always pick up trichomonas on a pap smear. So the trichomonas on pap smear will look like a pear shaped with flagellas. So this is the pap smear showing the trichomonas. Okay, so you can pick up trichomonas. You can pick up fungal organisms like Candida species. Candida pap smear is called as sheikh kebab appearance. Again, a very important MCQ based image based question. So these are the pseudo hyphae to which the vaginal epithelial cells are wound around. So this is giving that sheikh kebab appearance. Next, shift in the flora of the suggestive of bacterial vaginosis. So it can also tell us about the bacterial vaginosis. Bacterial morphology consistent with actinomyces. Actually bacterial vaginosis shift in the flora, and they can also see the clue cells. Clue cells picture is this, that is bacteria attached to the vaginal epithelial cells. Followed by you have the actinomyces can also be picked up. So actinomyces you will see the filamentous organisms arising from stuck to the epithelial cells, and this gives a cotton ball appearance. This gives a cotton ball, a woolly appearance or sundry appearance also we call it as. Actinomyces is the common organism associated with IUCD users. And apart from that, cellular changes consistent with herpes simplex virus and cellular changes consistent with cytomegalovirus also can be observed. So these are all can be picked up through the pap smear. Okay, so if you go back, helps to demonstrate trichomonas vaginalis infection is correct. It helps us to demonstrate trichomonas. Helps to diagnose other associated genital infections in the. It can help you to some extent to demonstrate the Candida, actinomyces, right? So that also looks okay for me, right? But the answer won't be either C or D. They're not asking what are all we can interpret by a pap smear. They're asking why are you doing pap smear in this lady? What is the role? Patient is asking why are you doing in me? What is the role of a pap smear? The main role of pap smear is to screen for cervical cancer. It can also screen the other genital tract cancers, but it cannot diagnose the cancers in the genital tract. It is a screening method, and you're solely using it mainly for screening the cervical cancer than any other cancers, but it can pick up. So helps to screen for cervical cancer is the appropriate answer. Helps to screen for cervical cancer is appropriate answer, right? So epithelial cell abnormalities which can be given by pap smear are squamous cell abnormalities, that is atypical squamous cells of undetermined significance and cannot exclude Hetzel, high grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. Then it gives, we can identify the low grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, we can identify the high grade squamous intraepithelial lesion, we can diagnose suspicious cancer, carcinoma in situ and squamous cell carcinoma. These are all about the squamous cell abnormalities. You can also identify glandular cell abnormalities, atypical glandular cells, endocervical cells, endometrial cells. You can also see atypical endometrial cell, endocervical cells favor neoplastic, glandular cells favor neoplastic, endocervical adenocarcinoma in situ, we can also see the endometrial cancer features also and not otherwise specified. If they pick up any vaginal cytology, vaginal abnormalities or endometrial abnormalities, any other malignant neoplasms which they have picked up from a pap smear also has to be mentioned. So that gives us a clarity that pap smear is not only used for, can not only detect only cervical cancers, it can detect we can screen it for cervical cancer. It can also pick up the abnormalities of any organisms causing infection. It can also pick up vaginal cytological abnormalities and endometrial abnormalities. A very another important point is if any patient shows endometrial cells, see this point is very important guys. If there is any endometrial cells on a pap smear in a woman aged more than 45 years, don't take this light. You have to consider there is some abnormality in the endometrial cells, probably hyperplasia or cancers. So you have to see, always pap smear is a screening. So it is telling probably some abnormality. So you have to confirm it with dilatation and curettage. So that is also one more MCQ. So whenever you see endometrial cells in the pap smear in a woman aged more than 45 years, please go for dilatation and curettage to reconfirm the abnormalities. Okay. So that is about the pap smear ka question and Bethesda system interpretation. Very important always for your exam. So coming up exams also we can expect any of these points to be asked to us. Next they ask us development of recombinant HPV vaccine based on which viral protein. Let's see what all viral proteins we have with the HPVs in order to speak about this. So early genes and late genes. Early genes we have E1 which helps in viral DNA replication, E2 viral transcription, DNA replication and segregation of viral genomes. So both E1 and E2 are helping in the viral DNA replication, right? E4 is helps in HPV gene amplification and virus maturation and release of virions. E5 potentiates the action of E6 and E7 and it generates the aneuploidy and chromosomal instability. E6 and E7 are the main they are the one which are causing the main pathological abnormalities in the cervical cells. See, E1, E2, E4 and E5 are working in the body of the virus. Are working within the virus. But E6 and E7 are going to work on the cervical epithelial cells, right? So E6 and E7, E6 binds and degrades the tumor suppressor P53 gene. P53 gene is normally required for apoptosis of the cells. It directs all abnormal cells into the programmed cell death or apoptosis. E7 binds and degrades the tumor suppressor protein, that is RB gene. So RB gene also inhibits the abnormal proliferation of the cervical epithelial cells. So now when RB gene is suppressed, you don't have that, and that's the reason why we have abnormal proliferation of the cervical epithelial cells. Late genes are L1, which is a major capsid protein. It attaches to the cell surface receptors and it is highly immunogenic. Okay, and it induces the production of neutralizing type specific antibodies against the virus. L2 is a minor capsid protein, helps packaging of viral DNAs into the capsids. So these are all the genes which are present in the virus. Now what happens is, when we acquire a natural infection through HPV virus, we start producing antibodies against it, but they are very less. They cannot protect us from a further infection or progression of they cannot stop from progression of the virus also. But when you give virus-like particles in order to initiate immunogenicity in our body and the cervical epithelium, those antibodies are going to be produced in an excess, and that helps us to protect from further HPV infections. So natural infection doesn't produce much antibodies, but when you give it as a vaccine, it helps us to protect from the cancer, because the immunogenic capacity is more and the antibodies being produced are more when vaccine is given. So HPV is associated with so many cancers. HPV is associated with cervical cancer, 100% attribution. 70% of vaginal cancers can be attributed to HPV. 43% of vulval cancer, genital warts 100%, anal cancer 88% association, oropharyngeal 13 to 56 association, 50% association with penile cancer. So when you are going to give HPV vaccine, it can protect all these cancers from the HPV infection to some extent. Cervical cancer, genital cancer, yes. Vaginal cancer, vulvar cancer, anal cancer, oropharyngeal and penile cancers, right? So how are we preparing this vaccine? So we are preparing virus-like particles which contain purified L1 protein. So purified L1 protein will mount the immunogenicity and we start producing antibodies. So it forms empty shells. It does not contain any viral genetic material or live biological product. So that's why it is non-infectious. So it is like L1 protein, but it doesn't contain any viral genetic material or live biological product. So it's just like L1 protein. So seeing that L1 protein, the antibodies which are going to produce will act against the real L1, right? So if you go back, development of recombinant HPV vaccine is based on which viral protein? So it is based on L1 protein. It's based on L1 protein. And which genes are responsible for cervical cancer formation is E6 and E7, because they suppress the P53 and RB gene. Okay. E1 and E2 helps in DNA replication of the virus. So they are virus-like particles which are purified L1 protein, and they form the empty shells that do not contain viral genetic material or live biological products, and they are non-infectious. So basically we have three vaccines: Cervarix, Gardasil and Gardasil 9. Ideal now is Gardasil 9. Cervarix is given in females alone. Gardasil and Gardasil 9 are given in both females and males. The age group which was initially suggested was 9 to 26 and Gardasil 9 to 21 for males. But now they tell that the recent guidelines have spoke that you can give HPV vaccination up to 45 years. There is definitely some benefit, then no benefit. So you can give beyond 26 years also up to 45 years. Nowadays what we are using are mainly Gardasil and Gardasil 9. Indeed, most of them are using Gardasil 9 itself. Cervarix is like completely outdated. Cervarix contains mainly HPV 16 and 18. HPV strains that the vaccine covers is only against 16 and 18. And it protects against mainly cervical cancer and genital warts. Gardasil is against HPV 6, 11, 16 and 18. So this protects against the anal cancers, cervical cancers, vulval cancers, vaginal cancers, anogenital warts, genital warts, pre-malignant and malignant lesions of all that anal, cervical, vulval, vaginal and warts. Okay. Whereas Gardasil 9 contains HPV 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, 58. So this also protects from anal, cervical, vulval, vaginal cancers and their pre-malignant lesions, as well as the warts also it protects them from. So that's about the Gardasil and Gardasil 9. Coming to the schedule, how should you give this Gardasil or Gardasil 9 is, avoid it in pregnancy, don't give it in pregnancy. So they have suggested that to avoid it in the pregnancy. So for Gardasil 9, you have to give both boys and girls. Ideally in US and all, they have kept it in their vaccination schedule, but in India we have not implemented in our vaccination schedule, right? But any girl or any boy who comes to you in your OPD, please motivate them for a Gardasil 9, right? So Gardasil 9 is against HPV 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, 58. Right? It's against so many HPVs. It's against so many HPVs. And this dosage schedule is first dose at 0 months. For those patients who are less than 14 years, you require only 2 doses. First dose at 0 months. Second dose between 6 to 12 months. More than 14 years patient. And those patients who are above 14 years, so 15 to 45 years, mainly 15 to 26, but you can give up to 45 as I told you, 0 months, followed by the second dose will be at 1 to 2 months. Followed by the third dose will be at 6 months. So beyond 14 years, it is 3 doses. Beyond 14 years, it is 3 doses. 0, 1 to 2 months and 6 months. It's an IM injection. So these are some important points pertaining to the HPV vaccination, right? So coming to the next question, all are true about the breech presentation in labor. Continuous electronic fetal heart rate monitoring is required for breech during labor. So breech is a high risk pregnancy, so definitely you require the continuous electronic fetal monitoring. So this statement is absolutely true. Vaginal breech delivery is allowed in hospitals where facilities for emergency cesarean section is available. Now yes, as breech is a high risk pregnancy and baby can go into asphyxia at any point of time, so you should have 24/7. The prerequisites for conducting the assisted vaginal breech delivery is you should have a 24/7 emergency cesarean section, OT available, anesthetist available, the physician, that is the obstetrician being available, right? And assisted vaginal delivery should be conducted by a skilled attendant. So the last sentence, if you see, vaginal breech delivery should be attempted in settings where trained person is present. So this is also absolutely true. When there is no skilled attendant, you deny doing the assisted vaginal breech delivery, because performing the assisted vaginal breech delivery is an art. So at every maneuver, doing all the Pinard's maneuver, Losset's maneuver, there is a skill. So definitely a skilled attendant only can perform it. So this statement is also true. Now seeing the CEA statement, Breech diagnosed for the first time in labor is a contraindication for vaginal delivery. This is a false. So when you have breech on perineum coming to you in a spontaneous labor, you always try to conduct it, right? If there is a problem, if there is a progress not happening properly, or if there is an asphyxia, if the fetal monitoring is showing any bradycardia, only then you take it for cesarean section. But breech on perineum is not an indication for cesarean section. So what are the indications for cesarean section? So the indications for cesarean section are when there is lack of operator experience, when patient requests for cesarean delivery, patient herself is telling, I really don't want the drama doctor, I just want to go for cesarean section. When baby's weight is more than 3.8 to 4 kgs, extremes in age, so baby weight more and baby weight less, that is preterm fetus or FGR. So baby weight more, I'm okay, but that baby can be stuck while coming out, so that's why I don't want to take a risk. But why preterm fetus and FGR? There's a risk of fetal distress. I agree with that point. Apart from that, in a preterm fetus, the skull bones are soft. So during the process of continuous contractions and retractions, there can be a risk of intraventricular hemorrhages below the skull. Okay. So fetal anomaly is incompatible with vaginal delivery, like hydrocephalus, ascites. So those patients you have to go for cesarean section only. Prior prenatal death or neonatal birth trauma. So when there is a bad event in a previous delivery, previous pregnancy, so this pregnancy, what are we more bothered is we have a healthy baby, right? Incomplete or footling breech. Because of the high risk of cord collapse in footling breech, we go for the direct cesarean section. Hyperextended head, pelvic contraction, or unfavorable pelvic shape. CPD is by default CPD or contracted pelvis is by default an indication for cesarean section. Apart from that, hyperextended head. So when you have a hyperextended head or star gazing breech, what happens is the patient, as the baby is seeing the star, so the engaging diameter of the fetal skull becomes more, and there is a chance of after coming head being stuck. Okay, and prior cesarean delivery also we go for again a repeat cesarean section. So these are the indications for repeat cesarean section, not breech on perineum. Obstetric grips are something very important from an undergraduate to postgraduate level. So we always determine it helps us to determine the presentation, position, and whether it's engaged or not, everything about the fetus, right? So we have 4 grips. The first one is a fundal grip, or we also call them as 4 Leopold maneuvers. Leopold first, second, third and fourth. So let's see the Leopold maneuvers and then come back to these grips and understand which grip they have given as an MCQ. So Leopold first grip is palpating the fundus. So while you are palpating the fundus, what it tells us what is present above. So whatever is present above, the ulta will be down. So it helps us to tell us the presentation, right? If fundus is empty, probably it's a transverse lie. So fundus is empty, you can suspect it's a transverse lie. If fundus has soft, irregular, broad structure, its buttocks up, so it's a cephalic presentation. If you feel hard, curved, globular and ballotable structure in the fundus, so it's the head, so it is a breech presentation. So fundal grip helps me to tell what is the presentation by palpating the upper pole. Now coming to the second grip, second Leopold maneuver, it's also called as lateral grip or umbilical grip. So in lateral grip or umbilical grip, I palpate and try to find out what is present in both sides, in lateral, where is the fetal spine present and where are the limbs present. So that way, wherever the fetal spine is present, occiput is that side. So it helps me to tell the position of the fetus also, right? Mainly, whichever side is the spine, that side I'll be able to palpate the fetal heart sounds. So usually wherever the back is there, that is the side where we palpate the fetal heart sounds. So wherever you are feeling a smooth curvilinear resistance, that side is the back. that side is the back. And wherever you are feeling multiple knob-like structures, so that is the where you have the fetal limbs. So whichever side you have the smooth curvilinear resistance, it's the fetal back, and wherever you feel the multiple knob-like structures, you feel the fetal limbs. So here hands are on the fundus, here they are coming laterally to the uterus. Okay. Next, third Leopold Manier. Third Leopold Manier is also called as Pollux grip. So Leopold third Manier is also called as Pollux grip. Pollux grip. It again tells you or confirms the what is the presentation which is there. So if you feel soft, hard, globular, ballotable, it means it's the head. If you feel soft, hard, globular and it is not getting, there is no movement, it is fixed, then the presenting part, that is the head, is fixed. If you feel there is something hard, globular and curved, if it is moving, ballotable, it means head is not engaged. If it is not moving, then head is fixed or engaged, right? If you feel soft, broad, irregular, then it's a breech. So it is confirming the presentation. Now to confirm whether the presenting part is engaged or not engaged, you go for the fourth Leopold Manier. So fourth Leopold Manier will tell you whether the presenting part is engaged or not engaged. So fourth Leopold Manier tells you whether the presenting part is engaged or not engaged. If your hands are converging, then presenting part is not engaged. If the hands are diverging, it means presenting part is engaged. So it tells us whether the presenting part is engaged or not engaged. It can also tell you the degree of the flexion of fetal head by palpating the sinciput and occiput. This fourth Leopold Manier, the first three Leopold Maniers are by seeing the patient's face. Only the fourth Leopold Manier is by seeing the patient's feet, and we call this as pelvic grip. Okay, so we have the fundal grip, umbilical grip, Pollux grip and pelvic grip, right? So which one is this? So you can beautifully see they are palpating laterally, so this is a lateral grip or the umbilical grip, right? So these are like, very important because you cannot afford to lose marks in such questions. Next question. A midwifery was examining a pregnant mother in labor. Suddenly she noticed a cord prolapse. Next line of management is. Now different options have been put forward. The options which I could get was Trendelenburg position, replace the cord inside the vagina, shift to the delivery room and wait and watch. Okay, now as I have got this is the second time we are getting about cord prolapse in the AIIMS. Last time mid exams AIIMS also they've asked cord prolapse, how quick, which is an indication for quick cesarean section, that is category 1 within 30 minutes. So cord prolapse is one of the indication for quick cesarean section. So let's see about cord prolapse and then come back and discuss this answer. Okay. So I'm going to speak in terms of what is its definition, what are its types, what are its risk factor, how do you diagnose, how do you manage, how can you prevent it, what in community setting. So like it is somewhere at home and you have diagnosed, so by a midwife. So in community setting, how do you manage and what is the counseling we do, right? So first and foremost, the cord prolapse is defined as descent of the umbilical cord into the lower uterine segment. So when there is a descent of the umbilical cord into the lower uterine segment, where it may lie adjacent to the presenting part or below the presenting part without intact fetal membranes, we call it as cord prolapse. So it is coming into the lower uterine segment and may lie adjacent to the presenting part or below the presenting part without intact fetal membranes. If membranes are intact and the cord is present below the presenting part, we call it as cord presentation. So as in the definition only you have the types of cord prolapse. So basically we have occult cord prolapse, cord presentation and overt cord prolapse. So we have occult cord presentation and overt cord prolapse. So when the membranes are ruptured, and the cord is completely out, we call it as overt cord prolapse. This is called as overt cord prolapse. So the cord is completely out. Membranes are intact and the cord is present below the presenting part. We call it as cord presentation. So if the cord is present beside the presenting part, then we call it as overt cord prolapse. Occult cord prolapse. So you have occult cord prolapse where cord is placed adjacent to the presenting part. So they mainly present you with variable deceleration because of the cord compression, or fetal distress also can be there. So usually if it is present beside, it is difficult for us to palpate it or detect it. Cord presentation mein cord is present below the presenting part. So yes, it can be palpated, and whenever you have a cord presentation, take her for emergency cesarean section. So basically you shift her for emergency cesarean section because this can go into overt cord prolapse. So overt cord prolapse is cord is lying below the presenting part, and it is with rupture of membranes. That's the types. Now what are the risk factors? Now before you see the risk factors, I would tell you the basic concept here is why is the cord going out. So this is the pelvis. So when the presenting part is not snugly fitting into the pelvis, it's somewhere high up, then you have space for the cord. Cord is small, right? So for the cord to slip beside the presenting part and go into the pelvis. So whenever the presenting part is not snugly fitting into the pelvis, you always have the risk of cord prolapse. So same thing you see here. Abnormal lie, oblique lie, transverse lie, breech may footling because footling doesn't snugly fit into the pelvis, fetal anomalies, multiple pregnancy, twins also, again you have the risk of malpresentation, so it doesn't fit into it, so you have the chance of cord slipping. Prematurity, again the baby is small, so cord can slip, right? So prematurity and IUGR, abnormal lies, malpresentation, fetal anomaly, multiple pregnancy. Abnormal lies mainly the transverse lie and oblique lie. Maternal, when there is a spontaneous rupture of membrane. So when the presenting part is high up and there is a spontaneous rupture of membrane, you always have the risk of cord prolapse. That's why whenever you have an SROM, that too in the hospital, you always do a PV to confirm that there is no cord coming out, and you do a CTG to confirm that everything is fine, right? When you have done an amniotomy, and if you have done amniotomy when the presenting part is high up, then whether it is a spontaneous or you have done, if presenting part is high up and rupture of membranes, there is always a risk of cord prolapse. So that's why you should always be careful. If there are any pelvic tumors like fibroids, cervical fibroids, or pelvic contracted pelvis and preterm labor. Placental में polyhydramnios and minor degree of placenta previa. Polyhydramnios, again the presenting part won't be fit into the pelvis, so the cord can escape. So basic funda is whenever the presenting part is high up and pelvis, it is not fitting into the pelvis and there is some space, so this cord will come out. Okay. Now if cord comes out, if there is a cord prolapse, what is the risk? So cord prolapse, the vessels can go into spasm. If the vessels can go into spasm, then you definitely have the risk of fetal distress and death. So can it be avoided? Yes. So I know the risk factors. So whenever I know those risk factors, I have to act accordingly when I observe those risk factors, right? So when you have transverse lie, oblique or unstable lie, admit them from 37 weeks. Not only that, when I have a high presenting part and patient is in labor, I'll not call her to come in active stage. I'll keep her admitted because I suspect a risk of cord prolapse in her, right? So when you have non-cephalic presentations and preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, then also you have to do an inpatient care. Artificial rupture of membrane should be avoided whenever the presenting part is mobile or high. Whenever the presenting part is mobile or high. So ARM should be avoided. Right. See, all these whatever I picked up are from the RCOG guidelines, that is Royal College guidelines. So if it becomes necessary to rupture the membrane with high presenting part, so you should do it wherever you have for immediate cesarean section. Okay. So probably if there is a cord prolapse, you can shift her. Right. So those are the preventive measures which you can take when you have a patient with cord prolapse. Now what do you do when you have a patient with cord prolapse in the community setting? So you ask the woman, so community setting means you have to send her. You suddenly observed a cord prolapse when there is a PHCs or home deliveries. So what are you going to do? So first, in the telephonic conversation, so what is the first thing you are supposed to ask her to do? Ask her to put knee chest face down position while the ambulance is coming. So immediately she should be put in knee chest face down position. So this is a knee chest face down position. Okay. What happens by this is it gives a maximum elevation of the presenting part. So as the presenting part is getting elevated, it will not compress the cord. Okay. Right. So initially, this is the good initial quickest what she can do is this. So change in the position is something first we can do whenever patient is in the community setting. Next, once the emergency ambulance transfer has come, change from knee chest face down position to exaggerated Sims position. You change it to exaggerated Sims position. So this is exaggerated Sims position. So where you ask the woman to put her leg on the pillow. So she should sleep. See, the hips are elevated with two pillows. So okay, this is the exaggerated Sims position. See here the hips are elevated but there is no support, so it is little tiring for the woman. So here I am supporting her hip elevation by putting two pillows. This is called exaggerated Sims position. So this along with Trendelenburg can give them little more benefit. But as such, Trendelenburg is not the best position for, but you can do. So head down position again can help to prevention of little compression. So this is the Trendelenburg position. So it can be an add-on, but Williams, the RCOG doesn't mention this position, but Trendelenburg can be add-on to exaggerated Sims position. Okay. And you should transfer it to the nearest position where you have the emergency obstetrician available to deliver her, right? Another thing which you can do is the midwife can do bladder distension. So the midwife can carry the Foley's catheter and do the bladder's distension, right? But very important, to prevent vasospasm, there should be minimal handling of loops of cord lying outside the vagina. Earlier they used to tell to cover it with a mop, but the recent guidelines of RCOG tells, please don't handle the loop of cords lying outside the vagina. So you should avoid handling the loop of cords which are placed outside the vagina. So what is this bladder filling is? So bladder filling what you do is, it is also called as Vago's method because he is the one who has told this. So what you fill the bladder with the Foley's catheter and you clamp it. When you do the bladder filling, it will push the presenting part. So it relieves the compression on the cord. Apart from that, the main reason why we are doing bladder filling is when you do the bladder filling, a full bladder will cause uterine hypotonia. So uterine contractions will stop. When uterine contractions have stopped, automatically the compression on the presenting part will come down, right? So that is another reason why we are doing the bladder filling. Bladder filling is also called as Vago method. So what are all the things which we are doing in the community setting? See, this question which we got was about community setting. So community setting may position. So position may you can do knee chest position, or you can knee chest initially, then you can change it to exaggerated Sims position, Or you can also lift the, what it also tells is, instead of handling the cord, you can lift the presenting part to relieve the compression on the cord. Man, if this presenting part is on the cord, you lift the presenting part to relieve the compression on the cord. Third thing you do, that fourth thing you can do is the bladder filling, that is vago method, where by bladder filling you will have a uterine contractions will come down, and that will decrease the cord compression, right? So if you go back to the question now, Trendle, replace the cord inside the vagina. I think we cannot take this because RCOG tells don't touch the cord even if they are outside. Wait and watch, no point. Now shift to delivery room. Yes, here also we are shifting her to the delivery room in this community setting. But before shifting, we did so many things. We did position change, we did the vago method, and we can lift the fetal head also, we can lift the presenting part also. So these should come first, then shift to the delivery room, right? So as I don't have any other better option, I have to go with the Trendelenburg position. But if you have in your question bladder filling or something, or knee chest position, I think that will be more appropriate answers. If you have knee chest or exaggerated Sims position, go with that. Next you go with bladder filling, but as I don't have any of them, I'm going with the Trendelenburg. Okay. So basic understanding of cord prolapse is important. So I hope this will make you to help you to write the notes also. So you just jot down the definition, then types. Types में this picture image can be asked next time. Then risk factors. Risk factors में fetal factors, maternal factors, and placental factors. How can we prevent it? And what is the management in the community setting? Now let's see the management in the fully equipped hospital. So fully equipped hospital में to prevent the cord compression, you can do either lifting it manually or bladder filling. So in fully equipped hospital, if cord prolapse is diagnosed before full dilatation. So before full dilatation only, if I have diagnosed the cord prolapse, please don't do any drama, just shift her for cesarean section. And that too, cord prolapse is that becomes a occult cord prolapse, right? So then you have to shift her for the cesarean section, right? Avoid minimal handling of loops is the second point which they told. Third, to prevent the cord prolapse, again, till you are shifting either manually or by filling the bladder, elevate the presenting part, right? And you can ask the woman to again do the knee chest or the exaggerated Sims position, right? But all this is just till you shift her to the delivery, right? Now, how can we deliver her? What should be the mode of delivery? Now, how do we take the decision what should be the mode of delivery is? So there is nothing specific in the hospital also, same things till you shift her to the delivery room, right? So how do you take the decision of delivery? You have to check for the fetal status. If fetus is dead, you allow for vaginal delivery. You continue to do a vaginal delivery because anyway fetus is dead. But if fetus is alive, then if cervix is not fully dilated, then you have to go for cesarean section. Category 1. You know, I think probably one day I'll tell you all these categories also, because you got Robson's classification. You have 10 categories of classification. That is how quick you have to deliver each patient based on her history. So category 1 are emergency cesarean sections which should be done within 30 minutes. Cord prolapse is one of the category 1 cesarean section. Next, if cervix is not fully dilated, if cervix is fully dilated and the attendant, the obstetrician is confident enough, she can attempt for either forceps or vacuum delivery. If it is alive and cervix is fully dilated, you can go for a quick instrumental delivery. She can go for a quick instrumental delivery, right? So this is regarding the cord prolapse. I hope it gives you a clarity what you have to do. So whenever you have a quad prolapse, put a knee chest position or exaggerated Sims position. Alternate is vago method, or you elevate the presenting part. Once you take her to the labor room, if dead, continue the vaginal delivery. If the baby is alive, cervix not fully dilated, shift her for cesarean section. Cervix is fully dilated, do the instrumental delivery. Next question. What is the cutoff of cervical dilatation at which nurse can start plotting a partogram? So we have the modified, actually the latent phase and active phase are changed now. Latent phase is 0 to 5 centimeters, active phase is 6 to 10 centimeters. But modified WHO partogram, or the last partogram which we have, is this. So we are plotting it from 4 centimeters cervical dilatation. So I believe the answer should be 4 centimeters because we are plotting it from 4 centimeters cervical dilatation. So the reference line goes from 4 to 10 centimeters dilatation, that is the alert line. 4 hours apart from the alert line, you have the action line. Reference line is the alert line, and where you have to take the intervention is the action line. Now, basic in the cervicogram is always the same, 3 golden lines. The 3 golden lines is the normal partogram should be always left of alert line. When it crosses the alert line, then you have to refer her to the higher center, refer to higher center. When it crosses the action line, you have to do an intervention as per the case scenario. Many people think crossing the action line means doing cesarean section. No, when it crosses the action line, you have to do intervention as per the case scenario. Partogram many times discussed in detail, so I'm just giving you a quick overview here. So the cutoff of cervical dilatation is 4 centimeters at which nurse should start the plotting. Right? Next. Pregnant female has cramps in the leg. What suggestion will you give? Actually, last NEET 2020 also we had a question on paralytic ileus. So paralytic ileus was also something very commonly seen post cesarean section in our post delivery wards. Similarly, in pregnant women, it's very common to see the leg cramps. We tend to see the leg cramps, and so when a patient has leg cramps, what suggestion will you give her? So we always this leg cramps is probably thought due to the weight gain, and so these are the involuntary, painful involuntary muscle contractions. Mainly they affect the calf and foot or both. They are mainly again seen in the night during second and third trimester. Causes are thought to be increase in the weight and change in the circulation. Compression by the fetus on the lymphatics and vessels is thought to be another reason. The compression by the gravid uterus is thought to be another reason for all these leg cramps. So how can we relieve it is stretching. So we tell the patient also this stretching. So knee extension and ankle dorsiflexion will help them. We ask them to extend the knee and dorsiflex. So that further stretches the muscle, and that further stretch will prevent the involuntary contractions. So that further keeps the muscle contracted. Keep the muscle contracted. So it prevents that involuntary contractions which is giving her pain. So this voluntary contraction helps her, gives her relief. Okay. So knee extension and ankle dorsiflexion. Adequate hydration. See, all these are some supporting things which tend to help, which we find, but not completely evidence based. So adequate hydration. Some of the studies tell if they have calcium and magnesium deficiency. So you can give calcium and magnesium supplementation. Proper footwear, that is a soft footwear she can wear at the home. While she is sleeping, also ask her to keep the legs elevated, and those women who are like nowadays active, and yogas are something which are always helping in everything. So ask her to be active in pregnancy also to have less all these effects. So pregnant female has cramps in the legs. What suggestion you will give? So it is the knee extension and dorsiflexion at the feet. Knee extension with dorsiflexion at ankle, right? Robson's classification group 1. Now what is this Robson's classification? So this was one thing which was completely out of the box for us, right? So this was categorized again by WHO to decrease the cesarean section rate. So as the cesarean section rate is going on touching the sky, so to decrease the cesarean section rate, he has categorized the patients. So there are 5 basic obstetric characteristics which he has considered. Parity, whether it's a nulliparous or multiparous, with or without previous cesarean. Onset of labor, whether it was spontaneous or induced, or pre-labor cesarean section. Gestational age, term or preterm. Presentation of the fetus, cephalic, breech or transverse. Number of fetus, whether it is a singleton or multiple pregnancy. Twins. So in the Robson's criteria, first, second, third, fourth. So first one and second are mainly the nulliparas. First is nullipara, singleton, cephalic, more than 37 weeks spontaneous labor. So this category are less likely to go into cesarean section, right? So first is when you have this beautiful nullipara, singleton, cephalic, more than 37 weeks and spontaneous labor. Second category is nullipara, singleton, cephalic, more than 37 weeks, but it again is divided into A and B. A is induced. B, like we have taken her cesarean section before labor. It's an elective cesarean section. Okay. Third one. Third and fourth are multipara. First and second are nullipara. Third and fourth are multipara. Okay. I tried to group it, so that we, in case next time again if they ask, we should remember. So multipara mein again same. Apart from multipara, nothing else is changing in third and fourth. Okay? So third mein multipara, singleton same, cephalic same, more than 37 weeks spontaneous labor. Again it will have a good, it will go into spontaneous labor and deliver vaginally, right? So fourth one is again same as second except that it is a multipara. So singleton, cephalic more than 37 weeks. 4A is induced delivery. 4B is before the, it is an elective cesarean section before labor. So those are the first 4 categories. You have 10 categories. Fifth category is patients with previous cesarean section. Fifth category is previous cesarean section, but they are singleton and cephalic and more than 37 weeks. So A is those previous cesarean section going into spontaneous labor. B is those who are going in with induced labor. C is their cesarean section before labor. Okay. Sixth is breech. Sixth is breech. A, B, C are same. Spontaneous A, B induced, C cesarean section before labor. Sixth is nulliparous breech. Seventh is multiparous breech. Seventh is multiparous breech. A, B, C are same again here. Eighth category are twins. Eighth category are twins. Multiple pregnancies. So A spontaneous labor, B they going into induced labor, C cesarean section before labor. Ninth, all abnormal lies including previous cesarean section but excluding breech, because breech is already over in 6 and 7. So like oblique lie, transverse lie, so all abnormal lies in the 9. 9A spontaneous, 9B induced, 9C cesarean section before labor. 10th is preterm, all singleton less than 37 weeks. Less than 37 weeks. Okay. So they have categorized the patient in this way to find out the cesarean section rate in whom it is more. So first and second are nulliparous. Third and fourth are multiparous. Fifth wala previous cesarean section. Fifth previous cesarean section. Sixth and seventh are breech, nullipara breech, multipara breech. Eighth is twins. Ninth is all abnormal lies. 10th is preterm. Remember this way, I think it will be easy for you to remember the Robson's classification also. Okay. So he is asking us group 1. Group 1 will always start with nulliparous. So nulliparous, singleton and spontaneous labor. Right. Nulliparous, singleton and spontaneous labor. Okay. Previous cesarean section will come under 5th. Position position is always one of my favorite, and I'm happy it has come. So again, a basic thing, and we should never afford to lose a mark here. So many students always have the confusion in the position. So whenever you have to answer about the position, first tell yourself what lie is this. Start from basic, not a problem. Here he gave easy, but next time if they give face or anything breach, you should be in a position to answer, right? So ask yourself lie. So lie longitudinal. Next, ask yourself what is the presentation. Presentation is cephalic, right? After presentation, ask yourself presenting part. Presenting part के हिसाब से your denominator will change, right? So here the presenting part is vertex. Once the presenting part is known, then you have to check the denominator. Denominator for vertex is occiput, right? Denominator for the vertex is occiput, right? So I have already in my, so there are three things you have to write. Which side is this, which denominator it is, and whether it is anterior or posterior, right? Now I already know the denominator is occiput, so I'll write occiput here. Okay, now here is the occiput. Which side is the occiput? Remember, the picture which they give is the patient, so patient will be always lying opposite to us, so her right and left will matter for the fetus, not my right and left. My right will be her left, so her right will be my left, opposite it is. So this side will be the right of her and this side will be the left of the patient. So it is, occiput is towards the right, so I'll write right. If it is facing towards the pubic symphysis, then you have to call it as anterior. If it is facing towards the sacrum, you have to call it posterior. Now if you observe in this picture, it is towards the pubic symphysis, 1/8 away from the pubic symphysis. So I will call it as anterior. So it is right occipito anterior. This all will take hardly 10 seconds, but go in this order, you will not miss any question in the positions. So check the presentation, presenting part, denominator, and then fill it accordingly. Okay. So this is a ROA. The last question we have is what is the causative image with the causative agent with the associated image? So there is a there is a mosquito, there is a mosquito which is going and damaging the brain of the brain, and that too teratogen, it is passing transplacental transmission. So it is passing through the placenta and then affecting the fetal developing brain. So something which is a mosquito carrier and which is causing the brain damage is nothing but the Zika virus. I think 2018 something, that time we had the Zika virus, not in India but mainly African countries. There was an epidemic. Now it is COVID. Surprising, COVID is the suspected question and they have given Zika here. So yes, Zika virus is transmitted mainly by Aedes mosquito. So it's mainly a flavivirus transmitted by Aedes mosquito. People who are having Zika virus, they mainly have mild fever. It's mainly teratogenic effect is more bothering than causing the problem to the patients. So they can have mainly mild fever or skin rash or conjunctivitis or muscle and joint pain and malaise and headache. Right? So she can pass the Zika to her fetus during the pregnancy or around the time of birth. So it can be during the 3 trimesters or during the birth. And that has led to all these cranial abnormalities and extracranial abnormalities. So it has caused microcephaly, there were so many babies who were born with microcephaly when there was a Zika endemic. So microcephaly, cerebral and ocular calcification, ventriculomegaly, periventricular cyst, callosal abnormalities, microphthalmia, atrophy, Blake cyst, Vermeer agenesis, cisterna, megacisterna magna, choroid plexus cyst, brain atrophy, cortical and white matter abnormalities, and apart from that FGR and oligo and talipus. So mainly you should know that Zika virus causes fetal brain abnormalities, especially microcephaly and cerebral. So obviously later it will lead to the cerebral palsy. So the picture, and it is mosquito transmitted. It is a mosquito transmitted. So the picture which they gave was of the Zika virus, right? So that was a discussion which we had for the INE CET question paper, and any doubts pertaining further you can always ask me. I am myself Dr. Ramyasri. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and you got so many new points, like I discussed in detail about this Robson's easy way of remembering. So I think we can, it is nullipara, multipara, then you had 1 2 nullipara, 3 4 multipara, then caesarean section is 5 6 7 breech, 6 7 is the breech, and 8th was twins, 9th 8th was twins, 9th all abnormal lies, 10th was preterm. So like this you can categorize, and other ABC to same for everything it was. So nullipara is 1 2, multipara 3 4, caesarean section 5, breech is 6 7, twins 8th, 9th is all abnormal lies, 10th is preterm, right? See, whenever you get one question which is not read by us, I think Robson was something which was out of the box for every student who attended the exam. Okay, so such things, I think next exam we cannot, once it is a previous year question, it should be jotted in your brain, right? So thank you guys, all the best, keep studying, you have a lot of time till NEET 2021, so don't waste your time, and OBG is a very strong subject, so make it more and more strong, keep solving MCQs. So right, that's for the session. Thank you, thanks a lot.